The Father's Justice. My name is Edward Whitaker. I'm 71 years old, and that night I stopped at a red light and saw something that shouldn't exist. Rain pressed hard against the windshield, each drop catching the orange glow of the traffic light above me. The city felt distant, muted, like everything had slowed just enough for something to break. I had been driving without direction for nearly an hour, the heater low, my hands steady on the wheel, my thoughts somewhere else entirely, until I saw her. At first, it was just a figure on the sidewalk, a woman standing too still in the cold, one arm wrapped tightly around a small child, the other stretched out toward passing cars. I almost looked away. Then the light shifted slightly, and her face came into view. Everything inside me went silent. It was Sophie, my daughter. Her hair was damp, clinging to her cheeks, her coat too thin for the weather, the child in her arms barely covered, pressed close against her chest, as if she were trying to shield her from the world. I didn't remember pulling the car over, but suddenly, I was there, door open, rain soaking through my sleeves as I stepped toward her. Sophie. She flinched. Not startled, not confused. Afraid. Her eyes darted past me, scanning the street, the cars, the shadows between buildings, like she was expecting someone to be watching. "They're watching," she whispered, her voice shaking so badly I almost didn't recognize it. I looked around instinctively, but there was nothing. Just passing headlights and strangers who didn't care. My daughter tightened her hold on the child, Mia, my granddaughter, and took a step back, like she didn't know if she could trust me. That was the moment something inside me shifted. I didn't ask another question. I just reached for them, opened the car door, and said quietly, "Get in." She hesitated for half a second, then moved, fast, as she had already learned what happened when you waited too long. As I closed the door and walked back around the car, I caught one last glimpse of the street behind us, dark, empty, but, somehow, it didn't feel that way anymore. And as I pulled away from the curb, I realized one thing I couldn't ignore. If Sophie was this afraid, then someone had put her there, and they weren't finished yet. I kept driving for several minutes without a destination, just following the road, putting distance between us and that corner. The rain softened against the windshield, turning into a thin mist, but Sophie didn't seem to notice. She sat curled against the door, shoulders trembling, her coat still dripping onto the seat beneath her. The heater was on full, warm air filling the cab, yet her hands stayed stiff, fingers locked tightly around Mia, as if letting go would cost her everything. I reached over and adjusted the vent toward her, careful not to move too fast. "You're freezing," I said quietly. She didn't answer. Her eyes stayed on the side mirror, watching the cars behind us, counting them, tracking them, like she expected one to turn, to follow. I waited. Then, keeping my voice level, I asked, "Where's Brandon, Sophie?" The name landed harder than I expected. Her shoulders flinched again, and for a moment, she squeezed her eyes shut, as if she could block it out. Mia shifted slightly in her arms, letting out a soft sound, and Sophie rocked her instinctively, a slow, automatic motion. "He's at home," she said after a pause, her voice thin. "At home?" I glanced at her, then back to the road. "Does he know where you are, right now?" A faint, hollow sound slipped from her throat, not quite a laugh, not quite a sob. "Yes," she whispered. I felt my grip tighten on the steering wheel. "Then why are you out there?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she adjusted the plastic around Mia, making sure it stayed dry, her movements small but precise. When she finally spoke, she didn't look at me. "He dropped us off." The words sat there, simple, quiet, but wrong. I slowed the truck slightly, the engine dropping into a lower hum. "Say that again." "He drives me to different corners," she said, her voice steadier now, as if repeating something she had learned by heart. "Early in the morning, sometimes, before it's even light." She swallowed, eyes still fixed ahead. "I have to stay there until evening." "And then what?" "If I don't make enough." Her fingers tightened around the edge of Mia's blanket. "We don't go back." I stared at the road, watching the lane lines slide under the headlights. Enough? 50, she said. Sometimes more. If it's a busy area. For a second, the only sound in the truck was the steady rhythm of the tires on wet pavement. He checks, she added. Counts it in front of me. I nodded once, slowly, forcing my hands to stay steady on the wheel. My jaw tightened, but I kept my eyes forward. And if you don't have it? She hesitated, then shook her head slightly. We wait outside, or he leaves us somewhere else. I exhaled through my nose, long and controlled. The kind of breath you take when you know that if you let it out any faster, it might turn into something else. Why? I asked. This time, she didn't answer at all. Her gaze drifted back to the mirror, watching again, counting again. And the way she kept doing that made one thing clear. This wasn't just something he had done once. It was something that had been happening for a while, and I still didn't know how deep it went. Sophie didn't speak for a while after that. He just kept rocking Mia in slow, steady motions, her eyes no longer on the mirror, but somewhere deeper, like she was replaying something she couldn't turn off. The road stretched ahead of us, quiet now, the city thinning out behind us, and I let the silence sit until she was ready. It started after Mia was born, she said finally, her voice low, almost careful. Not right away, but close enough. I glanced at her, then back to the road. What started? She shifted slightly in her seat, pulling the coat tighter around the baby before answering. Catherine moved in. There was no emotion in the way she said the name, and that was what made it worse. She said it was to help, Sophie continued, just for a few weeks, to make things easier. A faint breath escaped her, something between a sigh and a memory. At first, it sounded reasonable. And then, I asked. She watched everything, Sophie said. How I held Mia, how I fed her, how long I slept. Her fingers brushed absently against Mia's cheek, checking her without looking. Nothing was ever right. If Mia cried, it was because I didn't know what I was doing. If she slept, it was because I wasn't paying attention. Her voice stayed steady, but her hands didn't. I thought I was just tired, she added. Everyone says the first weeks are hard, that you don't sleep, that you make mistakes. She swallowed, eyes lowering. But they made sure I didn't sleep. I tightened my grip on the wheel again. What do you mean? Brandon would wake me up, she said. Every hour, sometimes more. He'd say Mia was crying, or that I missed something. She shook her head slowly. Half the time she wasn't even awake. And Catherine? She'd stand in the doorway, Sophie said, her gaze fixed on nothing now, watching, correcting, writing things down sometimes. A small pause, telling me I was too emotional, too slow, too unstable. The word hung there. I started forgetting things, she went on, simple things, where I put bottles when I last fed her. Her voice dropped further. They'd remind me, over and over, until it felt like proof. You knew something was wrong, I said quietly. I wasn't sure anymore, she replied. That answer landed heavier than anything else she had said. They'd talk about me in front of me, Sophie continued, like I wasn't there, like I was a problem they were trying to solve. Her lips pressed together for a second. Catherine would tell Brandon I needed help, that I wasn't safe to be around the baby. And he agreed? She gave a slight nod. He'd look at me like I was fragile, like I might break if he said the wrong thing. A faint, bitter edge crept into her voice. But he never said I was fine. Not once. The truck rolled through an empty intersection, the signal changing behind us as I drove on. I tried to push back, she said. At first, her hand tightened briefly on the fabric around Mia. I told them I was just tired, that I needed rest. And what did they do? They told me I already had enough, she answered, that I was sleeping too much, that I was neglecting her. I exhaled slowly, the air leaving my chest in a controlled line. After a while, Sophie added, her voice thinning again, it was easier to stop arguing. She leaned her head back against the seat, eyes half closed, not resting, just emptying. They kept repeating it, she said. Every day, every hour, until it didn't sound like their voice anymore. Her gaze shifted toward the window, watching the blurred outline of trees pass by. It sounded like mine. She fell quiet after that, her hand still moving gently over Mia's blanket. Steady, automatic, like it was the only thing left she trusted herself to do. And the way she said it made me wonder how long it had taken before she stopped believing in herself entirely. Sophie shifted slightly in her seat, adjusting Mia's blanket with careful, practiced hands, as if the movement itself helped her stay steady. For a moment, I thought she might stop there, that whatever came next was something she wasn't ready to say out loud. But then she drew in a slow breath and continued. "It was about 3 weeks after the surgery," she said. "I was still on medication, antibiotics, painkillers. I couldn't think straight most of the time. I kept my eyes on the road, listening. Brandon came into the bedroom one afternoon," she went on. "He had a folder, nothing unusual, just papers. He said it was for Mia." Her fingers traced the edge of the plastic covering, smoothing it down. "A trust fund, something to protect her future." "And you believed him?" She gave a small nod. "Why wouldn't I?" A faint pause. "He sat next to me, spoke softly, told me not to worry about the details, said he'd already taken care of everything." I could picture it too clearly. The calm tone, the controlled environment, the timing. "He pointed where I needed to sign," Sophie said. "Page after page. I didn't read them. I could barely keep my eyes open." She swallowed. "I trusted him." The words sat there, heavier than anything else. "How many documents?" I asked. "I don't know. Maybe 10, maybe more." She shook her head slightly. "They all looked the same. Clean. Professional. Nothing that felt wrong." "And Catherine?" I asked. "She was in the room," Sophie replied, "standing by the window, watching." Her voice flattened. "She didn't say much, just nodded when I hesitated, like she was confirming everything Brandon said." I exhaled slowly. "And that was it?" "At the time, yes." Sophie's gaze drifted downward. "He kissed my forehead when I finished, told me I'd done something good for Mia." The truck moved through a stretch of road lined with dim streetlights, their reflections breaking across the wet pavement. "It wasn't a trust fund," she said quietly. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. "It was everything," she continued. "The condo, the one in my name." Her voice remained calm, but her grip tightened slightly around the fabric. "The inheritance Mom left me, all of it transferred." "And the accounts?" "Closed or moved," she said, "within 2 days." I felt my jaw tighten again, but I kept my expression still, focused ahead. "There was more," she added. "A power of attorney, full control." She let out a shallow breath. "I signed that too." "For Brandon?" She shook her head once. "For Catherine." The answer landed with a cold finality that didn't need emphasis. "They didn't even hide it," Sophie said. Once everything was done, the tone changed. Her eyes lifted slightly, not meeting mine, but no longer distant. Conversations stopped. Doors stayed closed. I wasn't included anymore. "And the money?" I asked. She hesitated for a second, then answered. "Moved offshore," she said, "under Catherine's name." The truck passed under another light, the brief glow illuminating her face. Pale, tired, but clear. "They took it all," she finished. There was no anger in her voice, no disbelief left, just a quiet certainty, like she had already gone over it 100 times and found no way to undo it. I tightened my hands around the wheel again, not enough to lose control, just enough to feel something solid. "And after that?" I said slowly. "What changed?" Sophie didn't answer right away. She looked down at Mia, then out the window again, and the silence that followed felt like the edge of something worse. Sophie didn't answer right away. She kept her eyes on Mia, adjusting the edge of the blanket again, though it was already in place. The motion felt deliberate, like she needed something small and controlled before saying what came next. "It didn't happen all at once," she said quietly. "They eased into it. I waited. At first, it was just leaving the house," she continued. "Catherine would suggest I get fresh air, that it would help me think clearly." A faint pause. Brandon agreed. And you went? I thought it was normal, she said. People take walks, especially after being inside for so long. The road ahead curved slightly, and I followed it without speaking. Then Derek started driving me, she added. Said it wasn't safe for me to go alone. Her fingers tightened just a little. He'd take my phone before we left, said it would help me disconnect. I glanced at her briefly. Where did he take you? Different places, she said. Not close to home. Never the same twice. Her gaze drifted to the window. Areas where people didn't ask questions. I could picture it. The kind of streets people pass through quickly, not somewhere they stay. He'd stop the car, Sophie continued. Hand me a piece of cardboard, sometimes already written, sometimes blank. She swallowed. And then he'd tell me to get out. And you did? I didn't understand what was happening at first, she admitted. I thought it was some kind of test, like they were proving something. Her voice lowered. By the time I realized it wasn't, I didn't have a way back. The truck rolled over a patch of uneven pavement, the vibration barely noticeable. They stayed nearby, she said. Not always visible, but close. She glanced at the mirror again, almost automatically. Derek would park across the street, or around the corner. 10 no. And Brandon? He came sometimes, she answered. Not often, but enough. I felt the tension settle deeper in my chest. They watched me, Sophie said, not just to make sure I stayed, but to record it. Her eyes lowered again. Phones, cameras, I don't even know how many. Recorded what? Everything, she replied. Me standing there, holding Mia, asking for help. A small pause. They'd wait until I looked tired, until the light was bad, until I looked worse than I felt. The precision in her words made it clear. This wasn't random. They needed it to look real, she added, not staged. I exhaled slowly. Why? Sophie didn't hesitate this time. To build a case, she said. The answer came flat. Certain. They talked about it in front of me, she continued. At night, when they thought I wasn't listening. Her fingers pressed lightly against Mia's back. About documentation, about evidence, about patterns of behavior. I didn't interrupt. They wanted me to look unstable, she said. Neglectful. Incapable. A faint shift in her voice. A mother who couldn't take care of her own child. And Mia? I asked. They'd make sure she was with me, Sophie replied. Every time. She swallowed again. So it looked worse. The truck passed under another dim streetlight, casting a brief glow across the dashboard. They weren't just taking pictures, she added. They were creating a story. I nodded once, slowly. And the ending of that story, I said, keeping my voice even, was what? Sophie's eyes lifted, meeting mine for the first time since she started explaining. They take her, she said. Her gaze didn't waver. They take Mia. And no one questions why. Sophie went quiet again after that. Not the kind of silence that meant she was done, but the kind that comes when something harder is still waiting behind it. Her hand kept moving over Mia's back in slow, steady circles, though her eyes had lost focus, fixed somewhere beyond the glass. I tried to leave once, she said eventually. I didn't interrupt. It was early, she continued. Still dark. One of the mornings Derek dropped me off. A faint breath escaped her. I waited until he drove away, or at least I thought he had. The truck moved through another stretch of road, trees lining both sides now, the city lights fading behind us. There was a police station 2 blocks down, she said. I could see the lights through the rain. Her fingers tightened slightly. I remember thinking, if I could just get inside, everything would stop. And? I asked. I started walking, she replied. Fast at first, then slower when I realized no one was following. A small pause. I almost made it to the door. She swallowed. My phone buzzed. I felt something shift in my chest, but I kept my voice even. You had your phone? He gave it back that day, she said. Said I needed it, in case of emergencies. The way she repeated the phrase made it sound rehearsed. I didn't question it. What did the message say? Sophie didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached up and brushed a strand of damp hair behind her ear, her movements slower now. "It wasn't a message at first," she said. "It was a photo." The words landed softly, but they didn't need weight. "A photo of what?" I asked. She turned her head slightly, just enough to look at me. "You," she said. The truck seemed to narrow around me, the space tightening without warning. "You were in the front yard," Sophie continued, "near the fence, wearing that old blue jacket you like." Her voice stayed steady, but quieter. "You were trimming the bushes." I didn't speak. "It was taken from across the street," she added. "Far enough that you wouldn't notice, close enough that I could see your face clearly." My grip on the steering wheel tightened again, not enough to jerk the truck, but enough to feel it. "And then the message came," she said. "What did it say?" Sophie's gaze dropped back to Mia, her hand pausing for a second before continuing its slow movement. "He told me to turn around," she said. "Said if I walked into that station, if I talked to anyone." A brief hesitation. "The stress might be too much for you." I exhaled slowly, the air leaving my chest in a controlled line. "He said you had a weak heart," she added, "that something could happen quickly." "And you believed him?" She didn't answer that directly. "I stood there for a long time," Sophie said. "Right in front of those doors." Her voice lowered. "Close enough to see people moving inside. Close enough to hear voices." The road curved again, and I followed it without thinking. "I could have walked in," she continued. "Maybe nothing would have happened." A small pause. "Or maybe he was telling the truth." Her fingers tightened slightly around the blanket. I didn't know. I kept my eyes on the road, but I could feel the weight of her words settling in. "So I turned around," she said. The sentence was simple, final. "I walked back to the corner," she added, "and when Derek pulled up, I got back in the car." Silence filled the cab again, thicker this time. "I stayed because of you," Sophie said quietly. "Every time I thought about leaving, I saw that photo." I didn't respond, because there was nothing to say that wouldn't make it worse. "And the longer it went on," she whispered, her voice barely there, "the more I started to wonder." She didn't finish the thought, but the way her hand slowed over Mia's back made it clear. Whatever she had started to believe about herself, it hadn't come from nowhere. The cabin sat just off the narrow road, half hidden behind a line of wet cedar trees, the kind of place you only find if you already know it's there. I pulled the truck in slowly, headlights cutting through the dim gray light, then shut the engine off and listened for a moment. No traffic, no voices, just the faint sound of water moving somewhere beyond the trees. I helped Sophie out first. Her legs were unsteady when they touched the ground, like she hadn't stood on solid footing in a long time. She didn't say anything, just held Mia close and followed me inside. The air was cold. I moved through the small space out of habit, setting a fire, pulling old blankets from a wooden chest, filling a kettle from the tap. The stove clicked, then caught, and the room began to warm in slow, uneven waves. Sophie sat on the rug without being told, leaning back against the couch, Mia still in her arms. Within minutes, her eyes started to close. Not gradually, but all at once, like something in her finally gave out. "She needs to sleep," I murmured, though there was no one to hear it but myself. I eased Mia from her arms carefully, expecting resistance, but Sophie didn't react. Her breathing had already settled into something deeper. I placed the baby on a folded blanket nearby, within reach, then stepped back. For a while, I just stood there, watching. The firelight shifted across Sophie's face, catching the hollows beneath her eyes, the pale lines of exhaustion that hadn't been there before. She looked younger when she slept, and at the same time, older than I remembered. I moved to the window and looked out into the trees. The rain had stopped, but everything still felt damp, quiet, in a way that wasn't peaceful. I stayed there longer than I realized. At some point, the thought came. Not sudden, not loud, just steady. "I am done running." I let it settle. There wasn't anything left to debate. No version of this where hiding fixed it. No place far enough that would keep them from finding us if they wanted to. I turned back toward the room. Sophie hadn't moved. Mia slept beside her, small and still, wrapped in borrowed warmth. They think this ends with her disappearing, I said under my breath. It didn't. I walked over to the table, pulled my phone from my pocket, and stared at the screen for a second before unlocking it. There was only one name I needed, someone who didn't scare easily, someone who understood how things like this worked. I scrolled once, then stopped. If I made that call, there was no stepping back. No pretending this could be handled quietly. I held the phone in my hand, the fire crackling behind me, and realized something else just as clearly. If they had planned this far ahead, then what else had they already put in motion? Jonathan Blake didn't ask many questions when I called. He just told me where to meet him. His office sat on the second floor of an older building downtown, quiet from the outside, nothing about it drawing attention. Inside, it was different. Clean lines, dark wood, everything arranged with purpose. He took one look at Sophie and didn't waste time on introductions. "Sit," he said, already reaching for a notepad. Lauren Scott arrived less than an hour later, laptop in hand, hair pulled back, eyes moving quickly as she took in the room. She didn't speak at first, just sat up at the far end of the table, opening her system, connecting to something secure. "Start from the documents," Jonathan said, glancing between us. "What exactly did you sign?" Sophie explained. Not everything at once, but enough. Dates, the timing after the surgery, the number of pages, the way Brandon directed her through it. Lauren's fingers moved across the keyboard, precise and fast. "If the transfers happened digitally, there would be a trail," she said without looking up. "Even if they tried to clean it." The room settled into a different kind of silence, not empty this time, but focused. "Found something," she said after a few minutes. Jonathan stepped closer to her screen. I stayed where I was, watching. "The transfer was uploaded at 3 a.m, Lauren continued. "Timestamp is server-side, can't be altered easily." She glanced back at Sophie. "You were still in the hospital then, right?" Sophie nodded slowly. Jonathan's expression shifted slightly. "That alone is a problem for them." "There's more," Lauren added. She pulled up another file, enlarging it, the notary stamp attached to the documents. She paused for half a second. "It belongs to someone who died 3 years ago." Jonathan let out a quiet breath. "Forgery," he said simply. The word landed clean, exact. Lauren didn't stop there. Money moved within 48 hours. Routed through 2 domestic accounts, then pushed offshore. She turned the screen slightly so Jonathan could see the details. "Final destination is under Catherine Hale's name." I felt the weight of that settle in, but I kept my face still. "And the communication?" Jonathan asked. Lauren clicked again, opening a separate thread. "Cloud backup wasn't fully wiped," she said. "There are messages between Brandon and Derek." She didn't read them all, just enough. "Make sure she stays visible. Lighting needs to be poor," Lauren quoted, her tone neutral. "If she resists, remind her about her father." Jonathan gave a small nod. "That's coercion." The pieces were no longer scattered. They were aligning. Lauren leaned back slightly, scanning another file. "There's one more thing." She hesitated just long enough to draw attention. "A policy," she said, "recently issued." Jonathan looked at her. "On who?" Lauren's eyes shifted toward Sophie. "On her." The room went still. "Life insurance," Lauren continued. "High value, with a clause for accidental death." No one spoke for a moment. Because that detail didn't belong with the others. It didn't fit into a simple custody plan or financial theft. It suggested something else entirely. Jonathan closed the folder slowly, his expression sharpening. "Then this wasn't just about control," he said. I looked at Sophie, then back at the documents on the table. If they had already put something like that in place, then how far had they been willing to go to make sure it paid out? The conference room was on the 10th floor of a downtown hotel. Neutral walls, long glass table, nothing personal, nothing that could be traced back to either side. Jonathan had chosen it carefully. Quiet enough for a private conversation. Visible enough that no one could claim anything happened in secret. Sophie sat beside me, hands folded in her lap, shoulders straight but still. She wore a simple gray dress, nothing that drew attention. From the outside, she looked exactly like what they expected. Tired, cornered, ready to give in. "Remember," Jonathan said quietly, adjusting the folder in front of him. "Let him talk first." Sophie nodded once. The door opened right on time. Brandon stepped in with the same composed posture I had seen before. Controlled, confident, like he was walking into a situation he already owned. Derek followed a step behind, scanning the room without trying to hide it. Catherine came last, her expression tight, eyes sharp, taking in every detail. "Thank God," Brandon said, his voice soft, measured. "Sophie, we've been worried." She didn't respond. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, then pulled out a chair across from us and sat. Derek stayed near the wall. Catherine remained standing. "We can fix this," Brandon continued, sliding a folder across the table. "You just need to sign, and everything goes back to normal." Sophie glanced at the folder, then back at him. "Normal?" she asked quietly. "For Mia," he said. "For all of us." Jonathan leaned forward slightly, placing his hand over the folder before Sophie could touch it. "I think we'll review a few things first," he said. Brandon's smile didn't disappear, but it shifted. Jonathan opened his own file and slid the first document across the table. A printed message thread. Derek's posture changed immediately, subtle, but there. "Care to explain this?" Jonathan asked. Brandon glanced down, then back up, out of context. Jonathan didn't argue. He placed a second document down. Bank records, transfers, timestamps highlighted. "Wire movement," he said calmly. Catherine's jaw tightened. Then the third, the notary file. "Deceased 3 years ago," Jonathan added. The room grew quieter with each piece, like the air was being pulled out of it. Brandon leaned back slightly now, his expression harder. "You're making assumptions." "Am I?" Jonathan replied. Lauren's voice came through the speaker on the table, steady, clear. "We also recovered your cloud backup." Another document slid forward. This time, Brandon didn't reach for it. Sophie stood then, slow, deliberate, her chair barely making a sound as it moved back. "You told me I was unstable," she said, her voice even. "That I couldn't take care of my own child." Brandon didn't answer. "You built that," she continued, gesturing toward the table. "All of it." For the first time, his composure slipped. The door opened behind him. 2 officers stepped in, followed by a plainclothes detective. No rush, no raised voices, just presence. "Brandon Hale," one of them said. "We need you to come with us." Derek moved first, just a shift of weight toward the exit, but it was enough. "Stay where you are," the detective added. Catherine didn't speak. She didn't move either. Brandon looked at Sophie once more, not angry, not surprised, just calculating. Then his gaze shifted to me, and in that moment, I realized something hadn't gone the way he expected, because he still looked like he was trying to figure out what part of his plan had failed. It took time for everything to settle. Not days, not weeks, months of quiet procedures, signed statements, courtrooms that smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper. Brandon and Derek didn't fight as long as I expected. The evidence was too clean, too complete. They took deals in the end, long sentences instead of longer ones, their confidence replaced with something smaller, more measured. Catherine held out longer, but not with strength. Accounts were frozen, properties reviewed, and transfers reversed where they could be traced. The same systems she had relied on to hide everything turned against her, line by line. By the time it was over, there wasn't much left for her to hold on to. Sophie didn't attend every hearing. She didn't need to. Jonathan handled what had to be handled, and Lauren made sure nothing slipped through. What mattered was quieter, slower. A small house, not far from mine. A yard that caught the afternoon light. Windows that stayed open when the weather allowed. No cameras, no locked doors during the day. I sat on the back steps one evening, the air cool but steady, watching Mia move across the grass. She wasn't walking perfectly yet. More like drifting from one step to the next, arms out for balance, stopping every few seconds to look at something only she understood. Sophie stood a few feet away, hands in the soil, planting something along the fence line. She worked without rushing, brushing dirt from her palms before glancing up, just once, long enough to meet my eyes. She smiled, not wide, not forced, just real. For a while, neither of us spoke. The light shifted slowly across the yard, catching in Mia's hair as she crouched down to inspect a fallen leaf. The world didn't look different from the outside. Same trees, same sky, but it felt quieter in a way I hadn't noticed before. "We think we're safe," I said after a while, more to myself than anyone else. "Contracts, promises, all the things we build around our lives. Tech safe." Sophie listened, but didn't interrupt. "But none of it means much," I continued, watching Mia push herself back to her feet. "Not when it matters." I rested my hands on my knees, leaning forward slightly. The only thing that held was us. Sophie nodded once, slowly. "Money can change how people act. It can strip things down to their worst parts. But it never buys respect, and it never replaces what someone is willing to stand for when everything else is gone." Mia took another uneven step, then another, before stopping again, steadying herself without falling. I watched her for a moment longer, then looked back toward Sophie, and I found myself wondering, if you had been standing where I was, would you have seen the truth in time, or kept driving past that corner?